Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We have a great one for you today. We are live here on this Monday night to talk a little bit about a very interesting new study that caught my eye. It's been a bit of a subject of a lot of debate on some left-wing circles about Yale. It's by Yale political scientists. It talks about how should the left wing talk about its issues, through racial lenses or class-based lenses. And Eric Levitz in New York Magazine's The Intelligencer is going to process that article. Plus, I'm going to play a great clip from Heather McGhee on the Bad Faith podcast talking about this very issue that I'm seeing coming up a lot. It's a really fascinating concept to talk about. Also, meanwhile, the CIA gets into woke politics with a great video of a Latino woman about how her awesome her time has been at the CIA, or Latino woman, I should say. Also, we'll give you a preview on the big UK elections next week. Yes, because we do that here. We'll tell you what to expect. We'll catch you up on what's going there. I like talking about UK politics because it's like, even when you think we're off in a bad position, you can look over and see that things aren't that bad after all. You know, solidarity with all our friends and the left over there. Let's get into it. 5:14. Wow, getting up there. Newsflash. All right, we start today at the top of the show with a little bit of history from Eric Levitz, and so here is what he writes. From the time of the Constitution's ratification until Joe Biden's junior year of college, the United States was governed as a de jure racial caste system. And I would argue that a lot of, and I'm sure Eric Levitz would argue that a lot of these effects still have not worn off today. It denied most black Americans political power and economic opportunity. For this reason, America's working class is much less white than it is rich. Which means that any economic policy that takes resources away from America's economic elite and gives them to the laboring masses will also on net transfer resources from white Americans to black Americans. So that is why, I think redistributive class politics in itself is inherently, I think, reducing some of the structural damage that racism has caused. I think that is a big, because you kind of do one with the same, because if you make policies, if you spend the past however many years, many, many years, decades and decades, making policies designed to systematically keep black people out of political and economic power, if you give the lower class, which is, again, as on net black people, more economic opportunity through whatever method of your choosing, you are going to, redistributive policies are, pro-black. I would argue they're anti-racist. And that is, austerity is anti-black. That is for sure. Many black academics and experts, way smarter than me, have said that. And that is, I think, a big part of, what I think the left needs to come across here. It's it doesn't have to be either or race, class. I mean, especially in America, those two have been linked historically for a very long period of time. Historically, Republicans have taken pains to emphasize this fact, while Democrats have attempted to downplay it. The logic of these tactics was straightforward. The U.S. electorate is both overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly non-rich. If non-rich white voters believe that redistributive policies take money from white people like them, and give it to racial others, it will be easier for the anti-redistribution policy to prevail in elections. Hence, things like the welfare queen tactics of Ronald Reagan really demonizing some of the black people who were kind of, getting some whiff of economic opportunity in the 80s. Right the moment they could actually have some sort of an even economic system, they were moochers and awful criminals for even thinking about taking it. Is really how they were portrayed, as from the top down. So it's been very, very common. Heather McGhee, I think we're gonna play it. She makes an amazing point. She was like, 1960, overwhelmingly, a lot of people supported jobs guarantee. A lot of people supported, I think it was universal minimum income was the policy that overwhelmingly people support. Like 50+% of whites supported. After 1963, 1962, like the big civil rights marches, black people coming out there in big numbers, en masse, demanding jobs and employment. Like, people forget the March on Washington was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom by MLK. And that, right after, it was they asked the poll every 4 years. And by 1964, the poll had dipped to below like 25 or 35%. Like, that pretty much to me tells you everything you need to know. Thus in 2009, Glenn Beck attributed the Affordable Care Act as the beginning of reparations. Just insane. While Obama insisted it was a means of providing health care to middle-class Americans. So yeah, like that's for years and years and years. Politicians have been afraid to talk about, working class poor, the barely middle class. I think is Nina Turner says something like that. But that is like the weaseling around of politicians, like so. No, you are poor. It's not your fault that you're poor. It's because you have been screwed over. And if you start to realize that, you start to realize why you've been screwed over, how the people who are screwing over you are screwing over you, and how many people are in your same boat, then you start to be able to change your situation. In recent years, however, some Democrats have come to emphasize and occasionally even exaggerate the racial implications of race-neutral, redistributive policies. In the early days of the 2020 primary, multiple Democratic candidates attempted to rebrand their ideas for delivering affordable housing, baby bonds, and middle-class tax cuts as forms of reparations. Because, with the Democratic base, and you're talking about a lot of different things, kind of a lot of, like, the media pressures are like, oh, why aren't you have a policy for reparations? And people like Bernie would be like, Medicare for all is like reparations, like $50 minimum wage. Like, that is going to lift people out of poverty. And a lot of those people are going to be non-white. So, yeah, that is a very, very interesting way of putting it. So, like, Democrats are going to make a point of spotlighting the racial justice implications of progressive economic reforms from universal health care, as I said, to minimum wage. I literally did not read that part. Just said it, and they wrote it as well. This development interested Yale political scientists Micah English and Joshua Calla. A large body of poli-sci research has long affirmed the wisdom of the major parties' traditional messaging strategies, emphasizing that universal programs disproportionately benefit racial minorities decreases support for these programs. But perhaps times have changed. After all, Black Lives Matter movement had pretty much mounted the most prominent challenge to racial inequality the United States had seen in a generation, and the racial attitudes of white Democrats had quite liberalized in response. To test this possibility, English and Calla took a set of race-neutral economic policies, such as $15 minimum wage, student debt forgiveness, zoning reform, and the Green New Deal, as well as Medicare for all, and then presented them to voters using three different arguments. One that emphasized the policy's class implications, one that emphasized their impact on racial justice, and one that emphasized both. To enhance the validity of their experiment, they used Democratic politicians' actual rhetoric to stand for each of these arguments. Their findings confirmed the conventional wisdom. Their class message tended to modestly increase support for progressive policies, while arguments involving race slightly reduced support for them, though not by a statistically significant margin. So yeah, class only was the most effective. Race was, and these are again all within 0.1 on a 7-point scale. So it's really kind of quite small. Notably, while black voters were responsible for race and class-infected messages, they too found class-only messages the most persuasive. So that is something to be said. Like you would think that this would land with black people, non-white people in general, but even with black people, you think white people see it much easier through the class narrative, but no, it is very clear here that they are buying into this from the class perspective as well, which is it's quite surprising. So. But the paper's findings shouldn't be overinterpreted. A single survey experiment demonstrating the persuasion effects this modest can't settle any debates by itself. And it's hard to know how well such a study approximates the impact of political messaging in the real world. I mean, I think, if you think about the world, the structure of class and the structure of race in this country, I think it's really, in large parts, it's about putting the cart before the horse. Which comes first, race or class or race? Is class a product of race, or is race a product of class? Like these are definitely different ways that people of all different political persuasions see a lot of different things. Like personally, the way I see it is people in the past, clearly in the United States government, they created a lower class. The lower class for a long time was white. Now it's I would say not entirely significant, but it's less white. There's a lot more, especially in bigger cities. The people who tend to be working class are non-white, and that significantly kind of complicates things because also you've had years and years of economic policy, as I mentioned, designed to keep African Americans and non-white people down, and that has had significant effects. You can't just snap your fingers, sign the Civil Rights Act, and it's all gone. So no, that is not how it works. But I do think there is a certain message because just the concept of race in general has been so polarized in this country and so it's so tough to talk about that I think it is in much more of a dead end than the class messages. So in my view, the paper was a worthwhile, though not dispositive, contribution to our collective knowledge of one narrow question of public opinion. I don't think it's a narrow question of public opinion. I think it's pretty important. It's a pretty important strategy on the way that, especially, left liberals, people like, the AOCs of the world, the people who want to actually advocate for these policies in the first place, this is really concerning Nancy Pelosi because she's not arguing for any of this stuff. But in the end, it's going to be very important. This is strategy. This is how you win, I think, in a large part. And it's very interesting to see, get in the psyche of a lot of these kind of different people and find out what works. And I think it's just really, again, it's nothing's just positive here, but I think it's a very, very important issue. So Ian Haney-Lopez, a professor of public law at Berkeley and the chairman of the AFL-CIO's Advisory Council on Racial and Economic Justice, took exception to the study and the media's coverage of it. Lopez argued the paper reached a strong conclusion on the basis of weak evidence. Given the class message only weakly outperformed the racial one, he contends the authors went too far, including that linking public policies to race is detrimental for support of those policies. His chief substantive complaint, though, concerned the paper's neglect of the race-class narrative, a messaging strategy he co-pioneered. The race-class narrative frameworks counsels Democrats to weave forthright acknowledgement of racism into a message of cross-racial solidarity, to tell voters, in Lopez's words, that racial division is the main weapon in the class war which we are winning, class war the rich are winning. And this is actually probably the way I would see it, because race, a lot of times, it's for example, we talked about the welfare example. We talked about going all the way back, how Democrats, rich white Democrats in the South, got dirt poor Democrats who and whites in the South to side with them against the kind of Republicans and the kind of freed slaves, because although in reality the white people were much closer to slave status than the kind of plantation owner status, they were white and the others were black. So that was what made the system separation okay. So in Lopez's words, he says the racial division is the main weapon in the class war the rich are winning. I think that's a very interesting strategy. So they call it the RCN strategy. It's attracted significant interest and investment in progressive circles. And so Lopez had some cause for fearing that Calla and English's test of a race and class message, which merely adds a racial message onto a class one, rather than specifically framing racism as a weapon in the 1%'s class war, would be mistaken for his test of his own favorite framework. So they didn't quite do it well. I mean, I'm not sure they were trying to do his method, but they didn't do his method. So, Lopez didn't confine himself to narrow quibbles with the paper's methodology or requests for further research. Rather, he suggested the paper should be understood as a brief for one side in the Democratic Party's civil war over racial issues, namely the side that opposes working for racial justice for communities of color, which is a pretty big claim to make, and not one that I would necessarily say that I agree with. The paper is garnering attention not because its evidence is especially strong. Even the authors conclude their actual results are statistically weak. Overall, that we find the class frame weakly dominates both race and race-class frames, rather than garnering attention as ammunition to civil war that's been raging among Democrats since Republicans began dog-whistling in the 1960s. Some Dems urge directly challenging political racism and more. broadly working for racial justice for communities of color. And I think people who want to put class first, they just think that, it's not that, black people who are on welfare are bad people. Like not people who are trying to side with the Republicans, and in the same way that in the way that at least that I kind of get that he's intimating here, but people who view that as a more effective issue in convincing and like uniting, like much more kind of like traditional, people of the Marxist persuasion who like class is first, race is just a distraction kind of a thing. But I think it's hard to say that in America, that race is just a distraction. I think it's part of the story, but it's definitely not how we should end it, in my opinion. If that makes any sense. I don't know if it does. But anyway, this is a clip and kind of a concept I thought very well explained by Heather McGhee, former head of Desmos, kind of Democratic think tank manager, but also quite progressive. I'm not sure who she supported actually in the Democratic primary, but definitely like her analysis on this.
We are in a society where we pay people $7.25 for their work because we started by paying people $0. There is no way we would have this economy with this legislation of poverty where we say it is right and good and fair and fitting that somebody should leave their family and work all day and come home without enough money to feed that family, because we started at evaluating the life, the worth, the value of the labor of so many of our people as being subhuman. And so you don't have that kind of a steep wage hierarchy in societies that aren't so explicitly and profoundly racist, that don't have that sense of a hierarchy of human value. So that's why in the strategy, and this is where it comes back to the organizing strategy and the political strategy, that's why you have to contend not with racism as in like stupid things people say, but in the deeper belief in a hierarchy of human value, right? Mm-hmm. If you believe that some people are worth $10,000 an hour and some people are worth $7 an hour, and if you believe that, Black and brown and indigenous children who are growing up in deep poverty and their families who are growing up in deep poverty are somehow responsible for their own plight, then you're never actually going to like fight to create what we want to see in the world, which is equal opportunity, rights, and just a guarantee of a decent standard of living for everyone.
Yeah, so that is that's a pretty fair and pretty like good point, kind of definitely similar to what I was saying, but again, that's the whole thing. Is like, do you really kind of like dig into that narrative, and how do you frame the racism in the interplay with, of course, the class aspect of it? All right, very interesting discussion. We're going to have to move on, and we will talk a little bit about this crazy CIA video in a minute. Hello, everybody. You know you want to keep it locked to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. We have a lot of fun stuff coming your way on the programs. News flashes, of course, new every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Our flagship show continuing to bring you the news you need in this new political era. Uncultured is now live mixes, getting back into it. And, of course, that'll be every Saturday. And Hidden History is out every Thursday, wherever you get your podcast. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network's new spring lineup. You can listen wherever you get your podcast. And please be sure to rate us, review us, send us some comments. Spreaker.com/TSWS is the way to do it, or wherever you listen. However you listen, thank you so much for listening. This is Spencer Walsh Radio Network. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a pretty good one coming up for you right here. This is something. A gag-worthy CIA recruitment video featuring an intersectional and cisgender Latina mom has been panned by critics who say it's woke propaganda gone too far. We will kind of react to this. I saw it on, and it's really something quite remarkable. This was posted on Twitter. It features a 36-year-old officer who ticked off a series of left-wing buzzwords before boasting that she can wax elegant on complex legal issues while staying true to her Latina roots. She was like, I can talk about the tough situation in Venezuela while talking about my arroyo con pollo. I don't know. All right. I am unapologetically me. It's like, it's almost weird that it's hard to imagine that this seems like such a caricature, like in a parody of what work, like kind of like this type of person in, a normal world. But, I would have to say that I kind of feel bad. I'm just like a real person. She she seems nice, but again, she works for the CIA.
I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should.
Like people, like the first off the bat, like the imposter syndrome stuff is really something. Like because that is just such a it's such a character. Like no one actually, people joke about how people whine about how they have imposter syndrome every single day. All right, can we actually do the full clip here? All right, let's go.
In my college application essay, the line that spoke to me stated simply, I am not tragically colored. There is no sorrow dammed up in my soul nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. At 17, I had no idea what life would bring, but Sora's sentiment articulated so beautifully how I felt as a daughter of immigrants then and now. Nothing about me was or is tragic. I am perfectly made.
Yeah, this is very, very like boilerplate, like racial kind of like, messaging that's like we are proud women of color, but it's coming from the CIA. It's coming from the literal CIA at this point. Like, I mean, come on. This is just insane stuff. Like, of all the people,
I can wax eloquent on complex legal issues in English
these people
while also belting Guayaquil de mis amores
right,
in Spanish.
In Guatemala and Honduras,
I can change a diaper with one hand and console a crying toddler with the other. I am a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
Like what? I am a cisgender millennial who has been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. Like, wow. Like, that is, you can't get much more cliche than that.
I am intersectional, but my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I am a walking declaration, a woman whose inflection does not...
Well, this video, like, literally, this video is a box-checking exercise. It's like, intersectional, women, score, general anxiety disorder. That's like a triple word score in Scrabble. Like, this is how trivial... all these issues have been made by, the last however many years of kind of woke
rise
culture.
At the end of her sentences, suggesting that a question has been asked.
Wait,
I didn't
what?
exercise. I am a walking declaration, a woman whose inflection does not rise at the end of her sentences, suggesting that a question has been asked. I did not sneak into CIA. My employment was not and is not the result of a fluke or slip through the cracks. I earned my way in, and I earned my way up the ranks of this organization. I am educated, qualified, and competent, and sometimes I struggle. I struggle feeling like I could do more, be more to my two sons, and I struggle leaving the office when I feel there's so much more to do. I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should be.
That's another great line there.
I am tired of feeling like I'm supposed to apologize for the space I occupy rather than intoxicate people with my effort, my brilliance. I am proud of me, full stop. My parents left everything they knew and loved to expose me to opportunities they never had. Because of them, I stand here today a proud first-generation Latina and officer at CIA.
Imagine they left Guatemala because, the Jacobo Arbenz was overthrown or something like that. I don't. I shouldn't generalize. Or Cuba or something like that.
Me. I want you to be unapologetically you, whoever you are. No.
What if I'm unapologetically hating the CIA? I think that's what it's going to be. But it's just like a really disturbing trend from all the people. Like when you see corporations like Coke or Nike tweeting out like, Black Lives Matter, and then exploiting people in Indonesia and people of color on the other side of the world, like that is one thing. But when it's like the organization literally responsible for murdering the same person, like the race of the same person in that video, like destroying multiple Latin American countries, creating cycles of violence that still exist today or ended very recently. It's like civil wars, really just wreaking havoc all over the place, like up and down. Chile, Guatemala, Honduras, like Cuba, just to name 4 of these. It's just absolutely like mind-numbing. You can't, it's not every day something like that comes from the state. It almost feels like a taunt. Like, come on, this cannot be real. Like, it is really that insane. All right. And I was actually sent this, shout out to my mother who sent me this out of nowhere, with the, because she knows how insane I am about the CIA. She sent me this wonderful video from this comedian on Twitter, Blair Erskine, talking about the caption is, "Why I love working the CIA," and she just wrote, "Does this resonate with you?" And I was laughing out loud watching this, but it was very good.
I've never been like other girls, I've never done what the patriarchy wanted me to do. When I was a little girl playing Marco Polo in the pool with my friends, I would hold their heads underwater and make them tell me where polo was. You know what I mean? When we played I Spy, I would always spy the communists, right? I would always find the communists. And so just things like that. In college, when other girls were doing acid, I was the one giving them the acid, and then I would psychologically torture them for information. And so I've always just been,
that's how you know the CIA is right for you, baby.
Different. And that's why I joined the CIA. If I could go back and tell this little baby girl something, I think I would tell her that
holding up a picture of her parents.
Women can do murder too. We can do a little murder too if we want to.
Amazing. Just absolutely very, very good. Shout out to Blair Erskine for that. That was just, very good. Anyway, let's move on now. Let's talk a little bit about British politics. And straight from our favorite British media organization, Navarre Media, Stats for Lefties on Twitter, Elle Folan wrote this article for Navarre Media, kind of like the left's resident statistician, previewing the local labor elections. So pretty much what's happening is like the quote-unquote midterms, where they pretty much go around in each local area and elect something called councils. So each city or each region has a council. There's some mayoral elections. There's, all these local elections where tons and tons of seats are up for grabs. It's kind of going to be a good indication. Like in the United States, the opposition normally does well in these kind of off-year elections, but Keir Starmer is not expected to. So next Thursday, Britain will vote in its first electoral contest since 2019. The 6th of May local election will be a key test for Starmer's Labour. Of course, Keir Starmer, if you don't know, he is the new centrist, I would argue kind of like neo-Blairite, but less competent leader of the Labour Party. In order to have a shot at winning the next general election, the party must perform well. Yet sources within the Labour Party have already begun briefing the media that they expect a disappointing result. Starmer himself recently referred to the upcoming local election as tough, so it's not a good sign. It's not a good sign. One shadow cabinet member was even more explicit to the Financial Times. Our expectations are that we're going to really struggle. And you can already see, of course, one of their biggest spots is kind of a northeastern seat, kind of a deindustrialized town in northern Britain that was big for Labour in its kind of heyday, but had a huge kind of swing of disaffected voters towards Brexit. And they've held that seat for a long time. It's called Hartlepool. I believe we talked about it in the show. And there's going to be a big by-election because the MP had to resign for sexual harassment, so they're having an election to replace him. The guy there, the Labour candidate, kind of a centristy guy, really like his kind of thing he's most known for is like jet setting with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So it's not looking, let's just say, as good as it should for Labour in that seat. What we will see in 3 days. Starmer himself recently referred to the upcoming local elections again as tough, and our expectations are, he says, that we're going to really struggle. Indeed, some polls currently have Labour trailing the Conservatives by double digits. However, others show a closer race. with the Tories just 3 points ahead with Ipsos Mori and 6 points ahead with Survation, both of which could suggest clear swings to Labour in the last little bit. But what would a good result for Labour look like, and what can we actually expect? So here's what's up for election. In May, every eligible voter in Great Britain will get the chance to vote. Those in Scotland and Wales will elect devolved parliaments, so pretty much the parliaments for the kind of local country within the UK. So we got Scotland, Wales, they have their own parliaments. Their parliaments run Scotland separately, and they also send separate MPs to the main parliament, which is in London. In England, nearly 5,000 seats in a total of 150 councils being contested. English and Welsh voters will also elect regional leaders, including 40 police and crime commissioners, 8 metro mayors, 5 local mayors, and the London Assembly. So local mayors are kind of small-town mayors, and metro mayors are like bigger cities like Birmingham and stuff like that. I believe London also is this May 6th. Due to the 2020 elections being deferred a year by the pandemic, some of the areas up for election next week were last contested in 2016 and others in 2017. The below graph, included here in this article, shows the previous results for the two major parties in local and regional elections in Wales and Scotland. So Labour won 1,621 councillors and 2,052 for the Conservatives. Police and crime commissioners, Conservatives had 20, Labour had 15, 4 metro mayors for the Conservatives and 3 for the Tories. In Scotland and Wales, the previous election saw minority governments returned in both nations. The SNP lost their overall majority, but continued in power with the support of Scottish Greens, Welsh, and Wales. Labour won 29 out of 60 seats and formed a minority government with the Welsh Lib Dems. History suggests that in order to have a shot of winning the next general election, the opposition needs to perform well in the local elections. Of the last 10 opposition leaders, 9 gained seats in their first set of local elections. Indeed, the 2 who became PM, Blair and Cameron, gained over 7% of seats up for election, and the graph below illustrates these figures. As the number of seats up for election varies from year to year, I've shown the changes as a percentage of total seats. So in 1981, Labour gained like 23% of seats, and pretty much, the only time a opposition leader lost was actually in 2016. They lost 1%, but all throughout the kind of conservative years in power in the 80s and 90s with Thatcher, the Labour was gaining seats in councils left and right in the local elections, and then with Blair, Conservatives gained pretty solidly up until around 2011 when Labour gained, and 2010 the Tories were elected. From this, we can say that a good result for Labour would be to make gains representing over 5% of the 240 seats up for election, thereby winning the most seats in these elections. This would not be an exceptional performance, but better than when Neil Kinnock managed in 1984, John Smith in 1993, and Ian Duncan Smith in 2002, and Jeremy Corbyn in 2016. Local councillors aren't the only roles that will be up for election, however. English voters will also have a chance to elect regional mayors, and on a good night, Labour could achieve a decisive victory. Of the 8 mayors up for election, Labour has a real chance of winning all but one. Labour will almost certainly win West Yorkshire and hold Greater Manchester, Liverpool, and London. The key battlegrounds are going to be West Midlands, west of England, and the Tees Valley. Labour could win all 3, and together with its expected victories elsewhere, this would give Labour a landslide 7-1 victory. It's a similar story in the PCC elections, with Conservatives won the most PCCs by 2015 margins, police and crime commissioners by 20 to 15 margin in 2016, and Labour only needs a 4% swing to reverse that margin. In Scotland, Labour pretty much has no prospects of winning, having finished 3rd in 2016. Returning to 2nd place and denying the SNP a majority is the best Labour can really hope for. In Wales, Labour is seeking re-election after more than 2 decades in government. In that context, simply staying in government would be a pretty impressive achievement. Whilst an overall majority is possible, it's unlikely, so a top-tier result for Labour would be 30 seats, as it did in 2003 and 2012. In summary, a respectable for showing for Labour would look something like around more councillors, take the lead in councillors by just 1,850 to the Conservatives 1,800, 20 PCCs to the Tories 15, and 7 metro mayors to the Tories 1. So this is kind of a good result for Labour. What we can probably expect, given the reality, is something more like 1,700 councillors for Labour and 12 PCCs and 6 Metro mayors, and kind of expectations. So that is kind of the Stats for Lefties preview of the local elections. And, here's another thing. If they lose, which there's a very good chance they will, they're probably going to blame it on Jeremy Corbyn. There are already people trying to blame him for the loss in that northern seat I talked about up in Hartlepool, even under Corbyn's leadership, which in 2019, that was rough. They got their asses handed to them. He still won Hartlepool, so it would look pretty bad if Starmer lost it here. But watch them try and pin it on. We'll follow that. We'll follow the results on Friday. They should be out by Friday, so we will bring them to you then. That's it for us today. It's been Newsflash. We'll see you later.